Well, I want to thank you for joining us here today. If you braved traffic lights that were out, flooding, no air conditioning, or people on vacation, just thank you for being with us today. It's good to see you. So our scripture for today comes from the book of Genesis, chapter 25, verses 19 through 44, where we'll read together. This is the account of the family line of Abraham, son of Isaac. Abraham became the father of Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he married Rebekah, daughter of Bethuel, the Aramean, from Paddan Aram, and sister of Laban, the Aramean. Isaac prayed to the Lord on behalf of his wife, because she was childless. The Lord answered his prayer, and his wife Rebekah became pregnant. The babies jostled each other within her, and said, "Why?" And she said, "Why is this happening to me?" So she went to inquire of the Lord. The Lord said to her, "Two nations are in your womb, and two peoples from within you will be separated. One people will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger. When the time comes for her to give birth, there were twin boys in her womb. The first to come out was red, and his whole body was like a hairy garment. So they named him Esau. After this, his brother came out with his hand grasping Esau's heel. So he was named Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when Rebekah gave birth to them. The boys grew up, and Esau became a skillful hunter, a man of the open country, while Jacob was content to stay at home among the tents. Isaac, who had a taste for wild game, loved Esau, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Once, when Jacob was cooking some stew, Esau came in from the open country, famished. He said to Jacob, "Quick, let me have some of that red stew. I'm famished." That is why he was also called Edom. Jacob replied, "First sell me your birthright." "Look, I'm about to die," Esau said. "What good is the birthright to me?" But Jacob said, "Swear to me first." So he swore an oath to him, selling his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau some bread and some lentil stew. He ate and drank and then got up and left. So Esau despised his birthright. So I'd like to start off by saying it's kind of obvious, but families are messy. Families can be messy. As a father of 4 young kids, I can tell you that a house can get messy. Even when it's clean, it's messy. Even as we clean, it gets messy. So perhaps some here can relate. Sir Isaac Newton was actually the first to discover this in his third law of motion, which was published on July 5th, 1687, just 339 years ago this very day. So this is what it says. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. This means that whenever one object pushes or pulls on a second object, the second object instantly pushes or pulls back with the exact same amount of force in the opposite direction. Force then comes in pairs. You can't have a single force in nature. Forces are always interacting then between 2 different objects. Some examples are walking. So when you take a step, your foot pushes the ground backward, an action, and in reaction, the ground pushes your body forward. Or rockets, or maybe fireworks, for example. Rocket engines shoot hot exhaust gasward down. That's an action. And then in reaction, the gases push the rocket or fireworks up. Or swimming, when you cup your hands and you push your hands backward, that's an action. And the water in reaction pushes your body forward through the pool. Or, in the case of cleaning my house, as we open a dresser and put clothes in, an action. Or 1-year-old Noelle goes behind us and takes clothes out, a reaction. Or groceries get put away, that's an action. And then the cupboards kind of get pulled apart, a reaction. Or dishes get washed and put away. And then dishes get pulled out, used, and left throughout the house, a reaction. So there's this vicious duality to family life. Sometimes what that means is that for every 2 steps forward, there are also 2 steps back. But living spaces aren't the only things that get messy with family. Relationships in general can get a little bit messy. I see this a lot in the hospitals where I work. So my first taste of this was I was a new chaplain in the hospital, and I was on a neurology floor. I was talking to this nice little older lady. We're having a really good conversation. But then all of a sudden, 2 men kind of like stomped in. They were really angry, kind of aggressive, kind of bigger than me. And they were super upset. And they were upset because they just found out they were kicked out of the will. And so I'll just, word of advice, if you ever get kicked out of a will, stomping in there being really upset is not the way to get back in it. But that was my first experience of that there at the hospital. And besides a chaplain, I'm also an ethics consultant at the hospital. And so when family or staff disagree on a line of care for a patient, or if the care that's being asked for is considered to be what we would say physiologically futile or medically non-beneficial, I can be called in those cases and then offer a recommendation. So in cases where two parties disagree on a plan of care, I am then the mediator that helps work towards a solution. And so in the state of Michigan, by the way, this is just some free advice. If you're ever in a situation where you need a surrogate decision maker, it doesn't go to your spouse automatically or your significant other. It goes to a consensus of the family. So the significant other wouldn't even be in the situation with that. And that whole situation can then, when it just goes to the family, it can also be messy. It can also get a little dirty even. And so my advice is to go ahead and get that paperwork done and have it ready to go, because otherwise you might run into this next situation. Because most people ignore this conversation until it's a little too late. People have to guess what the person would want. People then disagree. People forget about what the patient would want, instead kind of think about things from their own perspective. And years of drama and years of mess that were swept under the rug are now out for everyone to see. And things can get pretty ugly. So this one time I was called to the ICU because a patient's sister showed up with forged documentation to try to kick the wife out of the group who'd be able to make decisions about the patient. And so in this situation, there's two groups of people, and they were kind of also heated. And my parenting skills kicked in. I took one group to one side of the hospital and the other group to the other side of the hospital. I needed consultation rooms that were apart from each other. And so I did that, and then I went to one and I listened to their side, their concerns, their hopes, their fears for the patient, and kind of took care of that conversation. And then I walked to the other side and got my steps in for the day. And I talked to that part of the family and listened to their hopes, their concerns, their fears for the patient, and what they were hoping for. And in that moment, I made this crucial discovery. They both wanted the same thing. The only real issue, they were on the same page about everything for the patient. The only real issue that was kind of coming up then were the ones that they were unwilling to talk about. But in that situation, they don't need a chaplain, they need a therapist. And so, but the problem was then solved. They're able to then come together. And through communication, we realized, hey, we wanted the same thing. But many families, they don't have it any better in the Bible. We don't have the whole story, but in a lot of these families in their lives, there's this lifetime of spoken and unspoken conflict. And it's like this is being passed down as a family heirloom with eternal results. And so the family of Jacob and Esau is actually no different. So in this story, there's a promise from God, but there's a couple different promises at play. God first made this covenant with Abraham about his children and the whole world then being blessed through his offspring. And this was passed down through his son Isaac. And now Isaac is having kids, twins actually. And so the promise continues to the next generation. Their story starts then in Genesis 25, where we read earlier. Genesis, by the way, is the first book of the Bible. And so Abraham and Sarah, they had Isaac. And Isaac in this scenario is now the father of two sons. And so in Genesis 25, 21 through 26, we read, Isaac prayed to the Lord on behalf of his wife, because she was childless. The Lord answered his prayer, and his wife Rebekah became pregnant. The babies jostled each other within her, and she said, "Why is this happening to me?" So she went to inquire of the Lord. The Lord said to her, "Two nations are in your womb, and two peoples from within you will be separated. One will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger." When time came for her to give birth, there were twin boys in her womb. The first to come out was red, and his whole body was like a hairy garment. So they named him Esau. After this, his brother came out, with his hand grasping Esau's heel. So he was named Jacob. So backing up a few verses, when Rebekah says, "Why is this happening to me?" I think that's biblical language sometimes between couples for, "This is your fault," or "You did this to me." And sometimes there are things that get said in pregnancy from both parties that we really don't mean. And so, or that highlight some other dysfunction within the relationship. For example, when my wife was in labor with our firstborn, Olivia, she was not allowed to eat. We had to get to the hospital pretty early, and she'd be in labor for 14 hours. And by lunchtime, I was pretty hungry. And so she told me that it was okay, and that if I was hungry, I should go ahead and have something to eat. That's the only lie she ever told me, by the way. And my mother-in-law was on her way, and I have some food issues, so I can't really eat a lot of food in the hospital. She offered to stop at Chili's because there's like one item there that I can have. And I was like, oh, what luck. It'll be nice food, it'll be good food that I can have. And this was going to work out great. And to this day, I think my mother-in-law knew better, but she also likes crime and special investigation shows on TV, and perhaps she wanted her own special. And so the lunch, even though it was delivery, and it took more than 20 minutes to get there, it was still hot, the smell was perfect, and I can have some lunch. And it was brought to the room, and I'm sitting in the chair, and the table's right here at my lunch. And then Jessica's over here on like a labor pillow or balloon or something, and ice chips. And so those are little chips of ice that she could eat. And in the most threatening tone I've ever experienced, she said, "Get out of the way." And she came for my lunch. And so I went to inquire of the Lord. But in our story today, it's Rebecca. She's the one that goes to God in prayer because of how her pregnancy is going. And many in this room know what that prayer is like when pregnancy gets complicated. She couldn't have children for so long now, and she finally gets pregnant. She has hope, but things aren't going the way she hoped. And so she went to inquire of the Lord. And God made this promise to her. God shared his plan for her and her family, something she could hold on to because this meant that things would be okay. It almost might not even matter what the promise is because things today are all right. And this promise was also one that then reinforced a promise already made to Abraham, her father-in-law. And so again, her husband Isaac was a son of Abraham, who in fact had many sons. And God would bless them all. But his covenant then was made specifically with Abraham to go through Isaac. And now Isaac is married to the wife God picked out, but her body hasn't been able to produce children. So again, he also goes to God in prayer. She then gets pregnant and has twins. But these twins seem to always kind of be in conflict with each other, even in the womb, even as they're being born. And clearly, Isaac and Rebekah, they didn't get naming advice from celebrities or anyone with good advice either. The name Esau just means hairy, so not really that inventive or anything. But it also sounds and looks like the Hebrew word for red and for Edom. The name Jacob means he grasps the heel. So they get points for originality here. But in saying he grasps the heel, this is also a Hebrew idiom for he deceives. And so kind of some baby talk with who's mommy's little deceiver. It just doesn't sound so good in retrospect, so maybe that's why God changed his name. But the boys were in conflict then from birth. And the parents don't make anything better. Isaac has a favorite son, the firstborn, Esau. Esau, he's kind of this man's man. He's a hunter, a tough guy. He was probably decked out in camo and would have driven a lifted truck. He was bigger, stronger, and faster, and just good at stuff. The downside was his character. He doesn't seem like he's the smartest guy. He strikes me as the kind of person where high school is like the best 5 years of his life. And, you know what I'm talking about, right? You met that person. And even so, he was also the kind of person where everything just kind of came naturally. He didn't have to rely on others because he had it covered, or daddy then made it happen. It's like he was the first trust fund baby. And so for Esau, perhaps being so dominant at this stage of life led him to be dismissive and not value what others would have to work for. And we're told that he didn't value his birthright, or rather he despised it. Jacob, on the other hand, he was Rebekah's favorite. He hung around the tent and preferred a more domestic lifestyle, and he gave her what she needed from him, and so he was her favorite. But he was still in competition and at odds then with his brother. But if you're in competition with someone who's bigger, stronger, faster, that seat on the bus was already taken. You got to have a different way to survive, right? And so he had to adapt and find other ways to get ahead. So as you read on in his story, you kind of get this idea of a person whose wheels are always turning. He's always up to something. He's always working an angle. He's learning how to manipulate, things like that, just work every situation for himself. These are probably honestly some skills he learned from his mom. Jacob had to strategize to get ahead. And so he had this promise from God about what his future would hold, but it seems to me that he might have felt like he had to take things into his own hands. And so the boys then, they grew up this way, with their parents' favorites being obvious. And not being your parents' favorite, especially when you find out, can be really devastating. At least that's what my brother and sister have said. So that's all right. If I was to be honest, though, and this entire situation in the story, I actually relate a lot to Jacob. I had undiagnosed celiac disease growing up, and it's this disease that can be kind of hard to figure out. It causes this autoimmune response in your body to where it attacks your body and keeps it from being able to absorb nutrients whenever it gets exposed to gluten, all the good stuff that you eat, right? And so try growing as a kid when you don't have any nutrients in your body. So I was the runt of the litter. I remember one recess where I was literally the kid underneath the jungle gym with a nosebleed. Like, that was me. That was my life growing up. And so I had to find other ways to get by. Despite being smaller, really than most other people, I became self-reliant. I would outthink and outplan others, and I'd live my best life 6 months in advance. Even now, I make contingency plans for contingency plans. So when I was a youth pastor here, I enjoyed planning youth trips because of all the different sources of data with vehicles, numbers of people, budgets, gas prices, driving routes, which highway to take. I enjoyed bringing all that together, and we'd be on time too. And so if I said we're having lunch at 11:52, and then in 30 minutes we'll be back in the vans, we'll get going, you knew to be back at the vans because you'd see taillights, right? So I had everything systematized and down and ready to go. And this is really kind of how I've learned to process life, because I guess that's just how I engage one problem after another. My wife, in our relationship, she says that I can be spontaneous. I just have to plan for it between 2 and 4, And so me in my life, I just need to have things planned out. I'm always working on something in that way. And in reality, it's really hard to turn my mind off. And so in this family, with these promises made by God, there's still this dysfunction. And we see a father who's trusting his son trusting himself, the mother trusting their other son, and then this other son then taking things into his own hands. And this leaves me wondering, mainly about myself, but perhaps I'll invite anyone else here as well. Where in our own lives are we supposed to be relying on God, but choose to rely on ourselves or some other source for validation? Where prayer is an afterthought rather than a beginning. That one person's attention or that one thing, if we just had that, things would be okay. Life would be so much easier if we just had what they had. Or if I only got this promotion or this raise, I could afford this, we could have this house. Or if I just got those concert tickets, I'd finally experience what I've been waiting to experience. I'd be happy. How many of us work our hands to the bone and take things in our own hands in an unfaithful way when we should be entrusting it to God's hands? See, in this story in our lives today, I believe that God makes promises. God makes a way. God is faithful. Yet many of us, we still try to earn it ourselves. And we see this at the end of our text today in Genesis 25, 29 through 34, where we read. Once when Jacob was cooking some stew, Esau came in from the open country, famished. He said to Jacob, "Quick, let me have some of that red stew. I'm famished." That's why he was also called Edom. Jacob replied, "First, sell me your birthright." "Look, I'm about to die," Esau said. "What good is this birthright to me?" But Jacob said, "Swear to me first." So he swore an oath to him, selling his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau some bread and some lentil stew. He ate and drank and then got up and left. So Esau despised his birthright. So Edom also means red here, if anyone's wondering why he was called Edom in this verse. But birthright here, this is reflecting what's in Deuteronomy 21, 15 through 17, where it says, "The firstborn is the first sign of the father's strength. The right of the firstborn belongs to him. The father must give him a double share of all he has." So this was something that Esau already had lined up, and it's something that ensured his dominance. He already knew this was here, right? So it's something he could just rely on and kind of go forward. But scholars believe that in this specific case, there are also other cases as well, where instead of like a double portion, it was the entire estate that would go to the firstborn, which would then kind of make the problem worse then for Jacob. And so how this then works, if you're the younger brother, which I'm a younger brother, by the way, the older brother would get at least twice what the younger brother would get in inheritance. And you could see why younger brothers didn't like this. And this was Jacob's issue. So he got to work. He knew what his brother was like, where his weaknesses were. He made a plan, and he was ready. So the birthright, though, it couldn't be taken away. You can't just take it from somebody. But it was transferable. It could be traded, or it could be sold. But in doing so, it wouldn't change the firstborn's rank in the family. He's just kind of using his birthright for some other means of gain. And so here in our story, Esau might have been the hungriest he's ever been. And Jacob was ready for him, kind of like a used car salesman, I imagine. And Esau sells his birthright to his brother for basically some SpaghettiOs, some red lentil stew. And because of this, we read that he despised his birthright. And believe it or not, being the big winner at the reading of the will, it wasn't as important as the blessing they were both desperate to receive. And things really then escalated at this point. So let's fast forward years later. Their father, Isaac, his health took a turn for the worst. He couldn't see anymore. His memory probably isn't quite what it was. And he was dying. And so when parents get older and they need care, and then there's issues with inheritance or a will or even probate court and things like that, too often there's tension then within the family, like it just comes to a head. And this was true back then, and it's true today. We just talked about the birthright, but there's something even more at stake here. Because the direction of each descendant or the family in general, it can be set in stone by a blessing from the patriarch of the family. And so these were known as testamental blessings. When a patriarch of the family sensed death was near, he would bless each of his children. In Hebrew thought, in this setting, the blessing once spoken, the word of blessing cannot be undone. Once it's said, it's out there. These words were final and were seen to function almost as fate. They would solidify the status, both present and future, of those who were blessed. And so Old Testament scholar Walter Brueggemann, he writes that blessing is understood as a world-transforming act, which cannot be denied by modern rationality. For the son as for the father, indeed for the entire family, the matter of the blessing is as dangerous as it is compelling. In other words, we don't have anything that would relate to this in the modern era. And our modern sensibilities can't just say that's not how things would work. It doesn't fit that way in the text. So these blessings were high-stakes moments and had the power to shape reality. And so in our story then, the time for blessing has finally come. And this takes us to chapter 27 of the book of Genesis. And Isaac knows his time is near. He's a shadow again of what he once was. His vision was gone, and he plans to give his blessing to Esau in verses 2 through 4. Isaac said, I'm now an old man and don't know the day of my death. Now then, get your equipment, your quiver and bow, and go out to the open country to hunt some wild game for me. Prepare me the kind of tasty food I like, and bring it to me to eat, so that I may give you my blessing before I die. So the family dysfunction kind of continues here. The father is supposed to bless all the children at the same time. However, Isaac was only intending to bless Esau, which implies that nothing then would be left for Jacob. And so they live in tents, right? So the sound deadening isn't that good. And so Rebecca must have been listening in. And she couldn't let this happen to her favorite son, so she sprang into action and then came up with this plan. She made some food just the way Isaac likes it. And since Isaac was blind, she gave it to Jacob to then present to his father. She dressed him in Esau's clothes so he would smell like him, and put goat skins on him so he'd have the texture of Isaac's favorite son. The hopes were, if they could overwhelm the senses of taste, touch, and smell, when Isaac heard Jacob's voice instead of Esau, he would lean on his other senses, probably because his hearing was going too. And so in verse 24 we read, Are you really my son, Esau? He asked. I am, he replied. Then he said, My son, bring me some of your game to eat, so that I may give you my blessing. Jacob brought it to him, and he ate. And he brought some wine, and he drank. Then his father Isaac said to him, Come here, my son, and kiss me. So he went to him and kissed him. When Isaac caught the smell of his clothes, and he blessed him and said, Ah, the smell of my son is like the smell of a field that the Lord has blessed. May God give you heaven's dew and earth's richness, an abundance of grain and new wine. May nations serve you, and peoples bow down to you. Be Lord over your brothers, and may the sons of your mother bow down to you. May those who curse you be cursed, and those who bless you be blessed. And so if you've ever driven to Cedar Point in the summertime, you know what a field of the Lord that's blessed by the Lord smells like. So, his clothes kind of had a stink to them, I think. But so Isaac, he intended to only bless Esau, and so Jacob had to craft himself in such a way in this situation to take advantage of that. And so perhaps Isaac, maybe his intentions were to make up for losing his birthright, Esau losing his birthright. But he was also intending then for this covenantal promise, this testamental blessing to go specifically only to Esau and not to Jacob. But again, Rebekah couldn't let this happen to her favorite son. After all, Jacob is the one that God spoke of when she prayed so many years ago, when everything was on the line for her. Perhaps she thought that God needed her to do this. And in our story, Jacob lives up to his name. He deceives. And Isaac passes on this covenant and testamental blessing to Jacob. And once it's done, and even done to the wrong person, it can't be undone. And as you can guess, Esau is mildly upset. And so he threatens to kill Jacob. And Jacob then runs for his life, and he lives in exile for a really long time. And through their own effort then, so the promised one then, it's like he's living in exile, not where he should be. It's like through their own actions, they put God's promises in jeopardy. It wasn't supposed to be like this. And then Rebekah, kind of what she gets out of all this is her favorite son is now gone, living in exile, running for his life, and she'll never see him again. She'll pass away before he's able to come back. And Jacob would have more wrestling and contention in his life. This would just kind of continue as you read on in his story, until he finally came face to face with his own determination and then his own trust in God. And you can read about that in Genesis 32. What's interesting to me here is that they were all aware of God's promise. They were all acting within it, either with it or against it. And to me, it seems like Rebekah and Jacob trusted in the promise, but also trusted in themselves more than God to see it through. You have to wonder how different things could have been if they just would have not have their trust misplaced. And then so again, for myself, but then for others here today, how many of us in our own lives are doing this? Taking things into our own hands in an unfaithful way when we should be trusting instead. But it's hard to know your role within this, isn't it? When you face a challenge, you might think, is this a test? Am I being faithful by not intervening and letting God work? Am I being faithful by acting in the obvious way that is needed to make it happen? This can be hard to know, and an honest person would wrestle with this. And for a silly, easy example to kind of get our heads around it, I believe God wants me to eat, which is good because I like food. But I think it'd be wrong to not eat, and assuming God would feed me, right? That kind of just makes sense. So I have to take action at some point. But at the same time, so if it's God's will, at one point am I supposed to do something? At what point am I not supposed to do something? This can be kind of something hard to decipher, hard to figure out. And so we also must inquire of the Lord and go to God in prayer. To trust God is not to sit back and take a back seat. It's not to reach over and take the wheel either, but to obediently and humbly take an active part in following after Jesus when he says, "Come and follow me." But also when he says to be still. And what's required of us then when he speaks is for our faithful response, to follow or to be still, but to be faithful in that. In Matthew 11:28 through 30, we read, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." So for us working the system, for us that kind of can't take a break and trying every angle to get ahead or to simply get our way, or for those of us where we've been weighed down by the burdens of life, Jesus offers us a simple trade, ours for his. This grind we are going through, we don't have to go through it alone. We could even just feel that burden lift off our shoulders, our spine decompress as we give it over to him. And we have a helper that knows the way. But these verses are only true because of what comes before them in verse 27, where Jesus says, "All things have been given to me by my Father. No one knows the Son except the Father, and no one knows the Father except the Son, and to those whom the Son chooses to reveal him." So because of who Jesus is, his authority over everything, and his place in creation in the world here today, we can rest in him. We can trust in his promises and his promise of salvation and life with him. He does not promise that things will be perfect or easy, and I'm not saying things will ever be perfect or even be easy. Most likely, life will be probably just a bit too much. But we're not alone. You're not alone. These verses in Matthew, they tell us that we can trust the voice that says, "Come and follow me." And we can also trust the voice that says, "Be still." That even if we don't know all to where this leads, we know the one leading. And what I've learned, and perhaps what I'm still learning, what I'm learning to look for in following after Christ is I'm looking for that peace, that sense of obedience in pursuing the next right thing. I have to remember to intentionally slow down. I have to remember to intentionally listen and to intentionally trust as well. And it's a daily thing for me. So in your own life, in your own situation, with whatever you might be facing today or tomorrow or the next, I hope that you have peace as you put your faith for today, tomorrow, and ever after in Jesus Christ. Will you pray with me? Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for the free gift of salvation and for your interest into each and every one of us today. May you bless us today by going before us and leading the way. May you come behind us and cover every single detail. We thank you that your voice is kind, that your voice is compassionate. We can rely on you in our worry and our doubt in any situation today. And as we pursue being people who do your will, may we have your peace today. So in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.